Um, I'm guessing that most of you have spent some time in church. I'm assuming there's no one here, maybe only a few people here, that this is your literally first time to go to a church service. I'm guessing all of you have had some kind of experience of church. If I know anything about church, and I do because I've been in church my entire life, many of you have had some bad experiences in church, but I appreciate you coming here. But I have some images about church that maybe resonate with you. One of the things about culture is, every culture has some good things about it, but also every culture has a few sort of weird things. And a weird part of American church culture is a lot of churches like to have a sign outside of their church. But sometimes people don't, look with the right kind of eyes as the sign that they put up here. So I hope you're not experiencing hell right now as you're listening to this particular preacher. Then there's this one. We love hurting people. Of course, we all know what they meant to say, but it could also read, we love to hurt people. And once again, I imagine all of you could tell some stories of people who have been hurt by the church. Okay? And you probably know people who once upon a time were very involved in church and just decided to give it up and haven't been back. And then, here's a typical American town named Friendsville Community Church. Remember in prayer the many who are sick of our church and our community. I'm not sure that's real. Maybe someone just invented that, for the fun of it. But indeed, we should remember in prayer everyone who is sick of our church. We should actually pray for ourselves that maybe we would not be the kind of people that, others get sick of. Anyway, even though those are humorous, at the same time, we all know or have church stories. And sometimes people wonder, maybe especially people who've never been involved in church or people who were in church and then decided to leave for whatever reason, and they might be thinking, what's up with those guys? What is it with those church people? And, don't they think? And then we might think, does Jesus even know what's going on? And people have this image of Jesus went to that church. Wow, those guys would be in trouble. Which might be true. But it raises that question, does Jesus actually know what's going on in the churches that go by his name? And so that's why one of the things we're looking at here in Revelation 2 and 3, these are messages. All of Revelation is this letter, but in this one letter to all the churches, there's these 7 personal messages, but they began with this, if you remember a couple of weeks ago. Among the lampstands was someone like the Son of Man. That's image of Jesus that John paints for us in Revelation chapter 1. But then we find out that these lampstands are actually the 7 churches, and there's this image of Jesus is in the midst of his churches. He is there. He's not separate. He does know what's going on. He does see. Right now he sees, and he's here, and he walks among the churches, and the good and bad. If you ever wonder, does Jesus even know what's going on? John is trying to say he certainly does. He walks among the churches. Of course, that raises the question, is that, good news or bad news? Is that a threat or an opportunity? The fact that Jesus is close to his churches, and he walks among them, and he's not distant. And so we're going to come back to that question. Is this reality that John talks about at the beginning of this strange book called Revelation, is this a threat or opportunity, this picture that John is painting for us? One guy that I found very, very helpful in sort of thinking through how to read Revelation maybe better than it is sometimes read, he summarizes it with these 5 words or phrases. It's about look and listen. It's about worship and witness. It's about come out and resist. the culture that we might be embedded in, there's times when we have to come out and resist that. And it's about following Jesus. And of course, this word witness we're often going to be using in this series because it's our way of kind of thinking about what are we supposed to do as we're reading the book of Revelation. And we're called to be a faithful witness, in this world that doesn't look very light or encouraging. We are called to be a particular kind of witness, and we are called to worship, to be faithful worshipers. And one of the ways in which we witness is to worship. But especially today, I want us to think about this word look, because it's a kind of a key word or a key idea that comes up in Revelation chapter 3, the last three personal messages to the seven churches. And so it begins with this message to the church in Sardis, and for possibly the last time, just remind you, this map, John is on this island of Patmos where he's kind of been exiled because he's been a faithful witness. The Romans don't like it, so they've sent him away to kind of shut him up, but that doesn't quite work. And so he writes this letter, probably hands it to a trusted assistant, and this guy or possibly woman is going to take a ship and sail and going to start in Ephesus, and the person is going to go to these seven churches one by one: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, and now that person arrives in Sardis. And just like John read that to us, it's exactly what would have happened back then, about 2,000 years ago. The church, small, probably smaller than we are, would have gathered, and this guy would have stood up and he would have just read this. They would have sat there and listened to the entire book of Revelation read to them. And then finally to Philadelphia and Laodicea. And so we're looking at these last three letters. Message to this particular church is that I know your deeds. You have a reputation of being alive, but you're dead. Or if you recall the film Princess Bride, there's that phrase, mostly dead. Okay, they are mostly dead. Not quite dead, but mostly dead. But wake up. And another way you could translate that is look, pay attention, open your eyes. Okay, get your eyes open, get your mind alert, and focus on what's actually going on here in your midst, and strengthen what is about to die. Because I found your deeds unfinished in the sight of God. So remember what you've received and heard. We actually were singing, one of the songs was about that. Remember what you received and heard and hold on to it, but you got to repent of what's not right. And if you don't wake up, I'm going to come like a thief. And of course, this is an image that John might remember from hearing Jesus. He talked about, returning as a thief when people aren't ready. I'm going to come like a thief comes unexpectedly, and you won't know when that time is going to come. So you've got to be awake. But you do have a few people in Sardis who haven't soiled their clothes, and they will walk with me, and they're going to be dressed in white, and they are worthy. And the one who is victorious will, like them, be dressed in white. We're not going to spend much time with this particular message, but in my mind, in many ways, this church in Sardis is, to me, a very typical kind of church where there's, it's a lot of people, but maybe a lot of dead people, kind of spiritually dead or emotionally dead, going to church. But in a lot of churches, even when there's some negative things, there's always some kind of community of people who really are alert and awake and are passionate about Jesus and are pursuing Jesus and following Jesus. So in many ways, this might be the most typical of these seven churches, where you've got a number of people who are, at least who Jesus sees as being kind of asleep. But the good news, it's not all that way in this particular church. But once again, wake up, look, pay attention. We're going to spend more time, though, with the next two churches. And so this is a church in Philadelphia. These are the words of him who is holy and true, and he holds the key of David. The authority that David had as his king, now the Son of Man, Jesus, has that authority. So all these 7 messages begin with a couple phrases about who Jesus is and a reminder of his significance. But he holds the key of David, the authority of David, and what he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. I know your deeds, and I place before you an open door that no one can shut. And this is a word of encouragement to this particular church. It's just kind of a reminder that no one else determines their spiritual destiny. I mean, they're this little band in this fairly big city, and they're getting pressure from all sides, from all sorts of different people in this city who want to kind of exclude them from everything. And Jesus is saying, I've got the key of David, and if I open a door, it's open. And if the door is open to you, then it's guaranteed to you. Your destiny is in my hand, is the message that's being communicated there. I know you just have a little strength, and we might feel that way. And I remember the early years of Communitas when we were just really 10, 12 people, and I thought, what's going on? Are we going to survive, and should we keep this going? And maybe they felt that way. We don't have much strength. But Jesus says, I walk among you, and you have kept my word, and you haven't denied my name. And I will make those who are a synagogue of Satan, those who claim to be Jews, they are not, but are liars, I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. I'm coming soon, so hold on to what you have. I'm close. I walk among the churches so that no one will take your crown. And if you're victorious, whoever is victorious, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God, and never again will they leave it. And I'll write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God. There's a couple details that I want to talk about in there, and one that might be a little bit troubling, and it's one of those texts in Revelation that I think has often been misused in the history of the church because people haven't really understood what kind of literature Revelation is. And it's this phrase, he says, there's these people who are a synagogue of Satan, and they claim to be Jews, but they are not. And one of the sad parts of at least European history is this strand of anti-Semitism, that there's something wrong with the Jews, and it's those Jews they're the ones who rejected Jesus, and they've been cast out. And it's happened in the churches, and people have found texts in the Bible where they felt like that excused them for their anti-Semitism. See, this is what Revelation says about those Jews, and so we are justified to persecute them and kick them out of our towns or to use them or whatever. So what's going on there? Is this, some kind of anti-Semitism that's in the book of Revelation? I mean, historically, what's going on is, in all of these cities, there are communities of Jewish people. Some are fairly large communities, and early in the history of the church, the Christian church was kind of seen as a subgroup of the Jewish faith, because many of the early Christians were Jews, and the Jewish religion was a legal religion in the Roman Empire, so they had freedom to worship and so forth. But now the Romans are kind of getting this picture that the Christians are different. They're not in that same group. So the Romans are thinking, now we can persecute those Christians. We don't need to worry about them. And so in some of the cities, sure enough, some of the Jewish people are, go get those Christian people. Leave us alone. We're okay. You've recognized us. If you want to, vent your evil, go vent your evil on those Christians, not at us. Okay, so that's kind of what's going on historically. But the question is then, what do we do with that? And this is a time when it's important that we understand what kind of literature Revelation is. And the point I want to make is actually going to be very important for something I want to say at this end of the sermon, and it will help us to make sense all through this series. How do we use Revelation? Now, I said when we started this that Revelation is a letter and a prophecy, and it's an apocalyptic. And what I said at that first sermon is that Revelation is a particular kind of literature, a particular genre of literature that has some particular characteristics that are different than other kinds of literature. One of those characteristics we're going to be seeing in every sermon is that this kind of literature is highly symbolic. I mean, if you've read Revelation, you know that it's got some really bizarre images. And are we supposed to read it literally or symbolically? And I'm suggesting that this kind of literature is full of symbols, and it operates on symbols. It has much more symbolism than even other kinds of poetry or other kinds of literature. Another characteristic of apocalyptic literature is that it's always based on someone getting a heavenly message. Someone has a dream or a vision, or someone takes this kind of journey to heaven, or an angel comes and visits them. So that's where the message comes from. It's a way of communicating that this is God's message to people, and it comes in some kind of supernatural way, and we see that here. But another characteristic of apocalyptic literature is that it paints everything in black and white, all good and all bad. Okay, in apocalyptic literature, there's no in-between, there's no gray area. Okay, the good is all good and the bad is all bad. And that's the way in which the message is presented. In 2 Peter chapter 2, this letter of 2 Peter is not all apocalyptic, but chapter 2 of 2 Peter has a lot of characteristics of apocalyptic literature. And the writer in 2 Peter talks about Lot, that Old Testament character, and he's telling this little tale about the destruction of Sodom, and Sodom was completely evil. Okay, all evil, that's why God destroyed Sodom. But here in this city of Sodom, there is this guy Lot. And 3 times in 2 Peter chapter 2, it's like Lot was righteous, and he was afflicted in his righteous soul because of the evil around him, because he was so righteous. Righteous Lot. Okay, that's the picture that is painted in 2 Peter chapter 2. If you go back to the book of Genesis and read that story, that guy Lot was not so righteous. I mean, he's in the city of Sodom because he's like, where's the best place to live? Where can I be richest and most comfortable? That's why he's in the city of Sodom. And if you read, man, it's a sordid story in the book of Sodom. And Lot is not a good character in the book of Genesis. Okay? I mean, he's not all bad, but he's definitely not all good. And there's not much righteous about Lot in the book of Genesis. But in 2 Peter chapter 2, the writer puts him on the good side, so he paints him as all good. Okay? Even though the reality is a little bit different. And if Lot is like, I'm going to take my role seriously. I mean, this guy calls me righteous, so I'm really righteous, and I don't need to do anything. In 2 Peter chapter 2, Lot has a particular role in the story, but the reality is different. It's much more gray. With that in mind, coming back to here, I've talked about, there's a story going on in the stage, and there's roles that are played. And so in this book, the role that the Jewish people are playing is in the negative role. Okay, but that's their role in the story. That's different from the real flesh and blood Jewish people living in the city of Philadelphia. And if we look at these people's role in the story, and we think in the story they're having an all-evil role, and that justifies me to do something bad to them because they're bad, they're the enemy, then we're missing the point. Okay, Revelation isn't saying these are the people we label evil, and then we treat them that way. That's their role in the story. But when we actually meet these people face to face, there's a lot different way in which we are supposed to interact with them. So John is not trying to talk about how bad the Jewish people are. He's talking about their role in the story. Okay, but that'll make a little bit more sense at the end of the sermon as we look at some other sermons. Another thing that's important to understand, if you look in verse 10, it says, "Since you have kept my command and endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth." What does that mean, that they're going to be kept from this hour. Now, one traditional way that this has been interpreted is that they're not going to experience this at all. The church is going to be kind of, blasted off the earth, and they're not even going to be on the earth when this occurs. And that's what it means they're kept. They're kept from even experiencing this hour of trial that is coming. Okay. But that is almost certainly not what is going on here and what John is trying to communicate to them. And you can get a hint of what I think is going on in a few other places in the New Testament. Hebrews chapter 5, the writer is talking about Jesus, and it says, in the days of his flesh, he offered up prayers and supplications with loud crying. Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud crying to the one who is able to save him from death. And he was heard. So think about what's happening there. Jesus prayed to be saved from death, and he was heard. But he died. So he wasn't saved in the sense of not literally being killed. He was killed. Okay? But he was saved in another way, not physically, literally, but he was preserved through that hour, and he was faithful through that hour, and he fulfilled his mission. In that sense, he was saved, and then he was resurrected, but he experienced death. Jesus truly experienced death. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, Paul knows he's at the end of his life. I mean, he's now in a Roman prison, and so Paul knew all about, the evil of Rome and what it could do to people. And he knows that Rome is going to cut his head off. And so he writes a lot in 2 Timothy about that. And he says, the Lord will rescue me from every evil deed and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. Okay? Paul is going to be rescued from every evil deed, except he will be killed. Okay? They will cut his head off. But he's going to be preserved. His faith is going to be preserved. And he will be faithful to the end. And God will be with him to the end. And he will make it safely to God's heavenly kingdom. And I think that's what John is saying here. They're going to be kept from the hour. Not that they're not going to experience it. They're going to experience it. This is how Revelation is going to unfold. This is what their life is. Their life is already under pressure. I mean, they're living in this Roman Empire where they're expected to worship the emperor and worship Rome. And if they don't, it's going to have economic consequences, if not physical death. They're already facing that. That's where they're living in this city. And Jesus is simply saying, you're going to make it. I'm going to be with you. You're not on your own, and your faith isn't just up to you. I'm with you. I'm going to strengthen your faith. You can make it. Just hold on. Okay? It's not that they're going to miss the suffering necessarily, but God is going to preserve them through it. They will spiritually survive. And then John says, I will make them a pillar in the temple of my God. I have bad news for you. I forgot to bring my watch today, so I have no idea. I'm going to try to keep moving and not take too long. But in any case, a pillar in the temple of my God, and never again will they leave it. Now again, remembering that Revelation is symbolic. Okay, they're going to be a pillar in the temple of my God. Does that mean literal? At the end of the book of Revelation, we're actually told there is no temple. There won't be a need for a temple, the new heavens, the new earth, because Jesus himself will be there. Okay, there'll be a living temple. So here again, we shouldn't picture they're going to be in a temple, but the point is that they're going to be a pillar. They're going to stand in the presence of Jesus forever. That's the point. They will be at home with Jesus. If Jesus is a temple, they're at home with him. They're a pillar there. They are planted in Jesus, is what John is trying to communicate to them. And then finally it says, I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from God. And I will also write on them my new name. There's a couple other places in Revelation that talks about things being written on people or a mark being placed on someone. And so I want to take a kind of a little time out and talk about this because, again, this is going to be very important as we think about what does this have to do with us. So here, there's this image of, a name being written on them. Again, probably not literally. But another place that troubles people in the book of Revelation is this mark of the beast. And so there's an image later on about, 666, being somehow placed on a forehead or placed on a hand and so forth. And so what is that about? What is in the book of Revelation? Does that mean literally, something's to be put on someone? Of course, now if you're paying attention to some people are like, oh no, it's not a literal 666. We're going to be chipped. And that's the mark of the beast is someone's going to put a chip on us, and that's how they're going to control us. And this is the literal mark of the beast. Yeah, I want to suggest again that if we read this too literally, okay, we're not going to actually get the point that we need to get that affects us practically. This might not be a wise thing for me to do, but just 2 days ago on our Facebook group page, I made this announcement, about the service, Just Do It, and I use Just Do It because that word Nike is in the book of Revelation. He who overcomes is victorious. That's where the Nike comes. I don't care anything about Nike, by the way. I'm an Adidas man myself. But anyway, I don't know if you see this, but there was a moment in time on Friday when 6 people liked this, and 66 people had seen our thing. And if we were really superstitious, it's 667. Thank you, whoever was the 67th person who saw that, or the 7th person who liked that particular post. That kind of saved us from being 666 too long. But I'm kind of being serious here, or humorous here. But the point is serious. We need to ask ourselves, what is John trying to communicate when he talks about the mark of the beast or someone having something written on them? Okay, but think about the way the word mark is used. And I'm very sorry right now that my name is Mark because it's very inconvenient for me to talk about mark. But the way that English word mark is used is you can make a mark, or you can talk about being marked by, or you can buy markers, big pens that you write on something. So you can talk about people are marked by something, and that means they are characterized by something. There's something that you see or experience in them, and that marks them. You know something about them because of that. It could be what, clothes that people wear, the color of hair, but it's often how they act. He's marked by a particular characteristic or particular behavior. Okay, and so there's actually in the book of Revelation, there's little clues about what is actually marking people, and it's not a matter of being physically marked, but people are marked with what they do. In Revelation chapter 14, it says, "A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, 'If anyone worships the beast and his image and receives his mark on the forehead or on the hand, he too will drink of the wine of God's fury.' If you worship the beast and receive your mark, the mark, I'm suggesting those are not two different things. The mark of the beast is you are marked by who you worship. If you worship the world, what the beast represents, and that marks you. Your worship marks you. These are people whose behavior means that they are marked by this beast. Not a physical mark, but what they do and who they worship and how they live, that marks them. Okay? And this physical mark that's in the story is just a symbol of what truly marks them. What marks them is what they worship. Their lifestyle marks them. What they worship marks them. How they live marks them. And they're simply living like the society around them that's symbolized by the beast. And so that marks them. Again, it's not a literal 666 or a chip. It's what you worship. That marks you. Positively, in Revelation, in chapter 19, and actually earlier in chapter 12, it talks about people obeying God's commandments, and holding the testimony of Jesus. And that's what marks the Christian. Who you worship. If you worship God, that marks you. Okay? If you live righteously in your community, that's what marks you, and that's what it means to be marked. Here, I walked away from the Church of Philadelphia, but to have the name of Jesus and the name of the New Jerusalem on them, again, doesn't mean literally something is written, but their lifestyle is communicating who they worship and who they belong to. I mean, if they go to church every Sunday, then that marks them. They're communicating, I belong to that particular people. They are marked by that people, whether you like it or not. This morning you are marked by the fact that you're here. Even if you never come back, at least this morning you're marked by your presence here. That marks you. You made some choice, and that communicates something about you. So this is what in all through Revelation it means to be marked by something. It's not literally a physical sign. It's your behavior marks you. Your worship marks you. And so the church at Philadelphia is marked by God, and they are marked by being the people of God. And that's obvious by what they do. When they worship God, they are marked by God. They are marked as God worshipers. When they gather together, they are marked by that community. Because they gather, their gathering marks them as people who belong to that community. And so what God promises them is this gives you an opportunity, and that gives you security. Once again, it's not going to come from the world. There's a lot of insecurity in the world. But if you remain faithful and you choose to be marked by God and the people of God, this is the opportunity that is put in front of you. And then we come to the last of the personal messages here. The church at Philadelphia, it was pretty much all positive. Okay, most of the churches, there's some mix and good and bad, but the church in Philadelphia was kind of all positive. This next church, though, is going to be a church that's going to seem like it's all negative. But it begins again with a message of who's giving this message. To the angel of the church in Laodicea write, these are the words of the Amen, the one who is true, the one that you say yes to, the faithful and true witness. Again, the faithful witness. And he's the ruler of God's creation. And these churches need that reminder because Caesar says, I'm the ruler. And they need to know, no, God is the ruler of all of creation. This Roman Empire is just a small part of all of creation, but God is ruler of it all. And there's a couple images here that are actually some of the, perhaps the best known or remembered in the book of Revelation, perhaps in all of the Bible. For instance, this image of, God or Jesus puking them out of his mouth or spitting them out of his mouth. I know your deeds. I walk among the churches. I'm close. And I know that you are neither cold or hot. I wish you were one or the other. But because you're just lukewarm, you're neither hot or cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. Now, sometimes, this might be taken as, okay, he's talking about being spiritually hot. On the other hand, there's people who are spiritually cold, and maybe the message is, well, if you're just spiritually lukewarm, that's just as bad. But in this context, in the context of Laodicea, the idea is probably this. Hot is good when you want something hot, and cold is good. When you want something cold, cold is good. In their own context, the water in Laodicea was thought to be not very good, not enjoyable to drink. But about 10 kilometers north, city of Hierapolis, there were hot springs. Okay, so if you wanted to sit in a hot spring, you go there. If you wanted really cold, fresh water, you'd go about 15 kilometers east to Colossae, and there was known for cold water, spring water that was cold. And so the people in Laodicea, they're probably thinking that, oh yeah, there's that hot water. That's really nice. I like to go up there and sit in the hot tub. And yeah, when I want cold water, when I'm in Colossae, I like to drink that good, clean, cold water. Hot is good and cold is good. For you Latvians here, if you don't know, Latvia is a sauna culture. And even though I love Latvia, I'm not quite the big fan of the sauna like Latvians do. But imagine going to a sauna, that was only slightly warmer than room temperature. And then you get out and then you dive in the water that's the same temperature. No one is going to do that. You want the sauna to be really, really hot. And that's one of the reasons it's hard to, do a sauna with real Latvians, because, man, they just like it hot. And I'm like 15 minutes, I'm done here, and I can't quite dive into the freezing water anyway. So, you want the sauna really, really hot, and then you want the water really, really cold, or then, there's the crazy nutcase Latvians, who run out there naked and roll in the snow and so forth. And man, that's just the best for them. Hot is good, cold is good. What's no good, what's useless is lukewarm. Okay, it doesn't serve its purpose. And that's the point here. This church is now serving no purpose. In Jesus' mind, the church should have a purpose. If it doesn't serve its purpose, why does it even need to exist? Well, as a matter of fact, it doesn't. And so that's why there's this image, just going to spit it out. If it doesn't do any good, just get rid of it. You say, I'm rich, I've acquired wealth, I don't need anything. But you don't realize that you're actually wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, naked. I counsel you, buy from me gold refined in fire. Then you can be truly rich, and white clothes to wear, so that you can cover your shameful nakedness, and salve to put on your eyes so that you can see. In Laodicea, there was a medical school. Here a lot of you go to Riga University. Laodicea had, Laodicea University. And another thing that was made in Laodicea was eye salve. And that's one of the reasons there's that image here. This is very much for their context. It was made in Laodicea, some kind of medicine for their eyes. And so the people in Laodicea know exactly what it's talking about. And they might think, I don't need that. And John or Jesus saying, you need that. You better get that. Because you're going blind. You don't see yourself accurately. You think you're okay. This church is marked by some things. It's marked by accommodation and assimilation. Accommodation is that they've tried to find their little niche in their society, a place where it's going to work for them, where they can survive, where they can make a living, maybe prosper, where they can get along well with their neighbors. So they're kind of accommodating their lifestyle and their belief system. Maybe in their head they still believe, but they're going to keep that in their private life. Outwardly, they're going to accommodate themselves to their context and culture, but what's going to happen is they're just going to be assimilated. They're going to be the same. There will no longer be any distinction between this church that names the name of Jesus and everyone else in Laodicea. They're just assimilated. They're marked by their culture, and especially in this case, they're marked by affluence. They think they're rich and self-satisfied and independent. The city of Laodicea, in fact, a number of those cities in the ancient world experienced earthquakes that destroyed pretty much the entire city. Like Smyrna in chapter 2, it wiped out the city, and the Romans came and gave them lots of money to rebuild the city. It happened in Laodicea. The city was wiped out. But the Laodiceans, we're rich. We don't need that Roman money. We can rebuild our city by ourselves. And so they refused the Roman money, because they were rich and independent. They don't need anyone else. We don't even need those Romans. We don't need them. We're Laodicea. We're okay. We can handle ourselves. And the church is thinking the same way. Affluent, comfortable, rich at home. We don't need anything else. We're okay. So they are marked by their culture. That's what marks them. Their lifestyle marks them. They look like everyone else, and there's no difference, no distinction. Jesus doesn't mark them at all. There's nothing of Jesus that is visible in what they do. Not in their schedule, not in the way they spend their money, not what they talk about, not where they go. Jesus does not mark any aspect of their life. They are simply marked by their culture. So the question for us is, what are you marked by? And is this message for us? In Luke chapter 12, there's a lot of connections to what's going on here. And Jesus is doing teaching about you got to be ready, and I'm going to return like a thief and so forth. And it might be an hour you don't expect. So whatever the hour, you've got to be ready. Whatever it is, be dressed in the right way, and, make sure your dishes are washed and all that kind of thing. Bathroom is clean, because you don't know when I'm coming back. And Peter asks, Lord, are you... is that actually for us, or is that for those other people? That's Peter's question. And Jesus, as he often does, doesn't answer the question directly, just tells a story, but he starts off by saying, who is the master servant who, when his master is away, does this or that or the other? Who is the master servant when Jesus says that to Peter? What is Jesus saying? Jesus is saying, this is for you too, Peter. This message is not just for someone else. You too need to be ready, Peter. You might be one of the chief of the disciples, and I've said I've got a great plan for you, but you've got to be ready too. This message is for you. Don't be blind. Don't think now you're okay. Okay, the message is for you. Now, this is how I want to think about this for ourselves, and maybe this is just a thought experiment, but I hope you will bear with me. And what I want to suggest is we think about, especially this church in Laodicea, and does this apply to us? I want to encourage us not to be blinded by our role in the story. Now, if you're following what's going on in the world, it really is a strange time in the world, all over the world, and certainly where I come from, originally America, and I'm so thankful to be here in Latvia, but it's just strange times. One of the things that's happening with people is there's this great polarization of extremes, and there's almost no middle ground, and it's hard to have a conversation, and you bring up any topic, and it's like suddenly everything explodes, and you can't just, can we discuss about this? Can we find some common ground? And the other people, they're just completely and utterly bad, and that's how we paint pictures. Those are those bad people, and we talked before about labels. I'm not going to mention labels, but people have labels, and they label those people, and they're all evil. And if we think in the story, in their role on the stage, their role is all evil, then what we end up doing is thinking, well, my role is on the good side. This is that, black and white colors, and if we take some things literally, we paint in this picture that they're all bad, and if they're all bad, I'm not all bad, so that means I'm all good. And there's that danger of just we label ourselves as the good guys because we don't think we're the bad guys. So it's just like, okay, this is just where we must be over here. We must be okay. But the reality we know the reality is much more gray. And we need to know that those evil people are not really all evil. Their role in the story might be evil, but they are not all evil. And the people over here are not all good. And we know that. We know we're not all good. And so what I want us to encourage us to do right now is just as a thought experiment, just let's assume that we might be blind a little bit. That there is some blindness about ourselves, that there's some things about us that we're missing, that we don't see. There's some things that are not quite right. We might be mostly good and mostly alive, okay, but we're not all good. And we're not fully alive. So can we just assume, just for a moment, that there's There might be something missing in my life, something I don't see, some area where I think I'm okay, but maybe I'm not. And what if I'm not? And how will I see that if I don't make the effort to look and find it and to be honest? Okay, so just rather than thinking we're the Philadelphia church, let's, again, just as a thought experiment, assume that what if we were in Laodicea? Is there something blind? Is there some area of life, some room in my life that I need to let Jesus into? We might think we've opened the door to Jesus and he lives in our life, but is there some part of our life that we would rather Jesus not get involved in? I mean, just saying it that way, right now, I could make a list for me. So could we just assume that we might be a little bit blind? We have room to grow. But to this church, Jesus says, I stand at the door and knock. And again, is this a threat or an opportunity? Is this good news or bad news? I mean, he said negative things about this church in Laodicea. And now does John say this? I'm standing at the door. Is it like, wow, you guys are in trouble, you know. When mom gets home, she's sure going to give it to you. What do the words say? As many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. And the word love here is really interesting. It's not the usual word like for God's love, agape, kind of God's kind of love. It's phileo, philos, friend. I mean, Jesus is saying, the people who I count as friends, the ones who I see as friends, the people that I put the label friend on, Jesus says, I rebuke and chasten them. So be zealous and repent, because I'm your friend. Look, I'm standing at the door and knocking. I'm here, I'm close. I'm just on the other side of the door. And if you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and dine with you and he with me. And it ends with that image of eating together, which in pretty much every culture in all time symbolizes fellowship. I mean, you know, we make jokes about churches eating all the time. We have a special table of food out there, and when you really want to be close to someone, you know, you invite them over. When I was first here in Latvia, it was like, you know, when I first scored an invitation to a Latvian party, you know, when you go to a real Latvian party with all the food on the table, my goodness, you could feed, you know, several whole countries. And when you scored that invitation to a Latvian party, because, you know, Latvians are more introverted, it doesn't necessarily happen right away. That was a significant thing, you know, to be invited to eat together. And most of the time, if you have a meeting, I mean, when I have a meeting with someone, I don't say, hey, can we meet? Let's go sit in the park, and we'll talk and have, it's always, you know, let's meet at this cafe or this pub or wherever it is, and, you know, it always has food involved. Okay, because that symbolizes something very, very important. Sitting down and eating together. And Jesus says that's what he wants. Let's schedule a time. Let's get together. Let's sit. Let's share food together. I'm your friend. He stands at the door and knocks. It's an opportunity. It's not mainly a threat. It can be a threat, but it's mainly an opportunity. So we can look at ourselves honestly. We can open our eyes and we can find those dead places in our life that needs the life of Jesus. We can do that, and we can do it in complete safety and security, because the one who's going to come in is our friend. You can leave the door unlocked. It's a friend on the other side of the door. It's a friend. So let's open our eyes and let's just assume there's some things that Jesus can fix, and we know we need it to be fixed. And we know when it's done, it'll be a great thing. It's hard now, but it'll be great. When he's done with that process, it'll be great. We can open our eyes and open our doors.